Let me tell y'all something real today. There's a whole lot of noise out here about what it means to be a man. Some folks say it's about muscles, money, or being the loudest one in the room. But let me straighten this out for you. Masculinity, real masculinity, ain't about flexing your chest. It's about standing strong when life throws everything at you. It's about competence, a man's competence, his ability to handle his business, lead with clarity, protect with love, provide with integrity, and show up when it counts. That's the measure. That's the blueprint. See, a competent man doesn't need to tell you he's a man. You feel it. When he walks into a room, there's peace, not chaos. There's direction, not confusion. He ain't out here trying to prove something every minute because competence speaks louder than ego ever could. Being competent means you know how to carry weight. I'm not just talking about physical strength. I'm talking about emotional weight, spiritual weight, financial weight. You handle responsibility like it's your birthright. You don't run from problems. You solve them. You don't blame others. You look in the mirror and ask, what can I do better? You see, competence and masculinity walk hand in hand. One feeds the other. A man who can't take care of his life can't lead one. You can't be the head if you ain't got no direction. If your woman's got to carry everything, her dreams, the bills, the kids, and you, then you ain't operating in your competence. You just out here existing, not building. Now I'm not saying you got to have everything figured out. No, sir. But you got to be trying. You got to be building. A man's purpose ain't to be perfect. It's to be progressing. That's competence too. The willingness to learn, to grow, to fix what's broken instead of walking away. A competent man don't make excuses. He makes adjustments. He don't raise his voice. He raises his standards. He don't fight to dominate. He fights to protect, to serve, to guide. And most importantly, he don't seek applause. He seeks respect. Let me tell you something else. Competence ain't just for you. It blesses everyone around you, your woman, your children, your brothers, your community. When a man steps up in competence, everyone breathes easier. Everyone walks taller. So if you want to talk masculinity, don't come to me with noise. Come to me with character. Come to me with consistency. Come to me with competence. Because at the end of the day, when everything else fades, that's what separates boys from men. Not what you wear, not how much you lift, not who fears you, but what you can handle and how you handle it. Now go out there and handle it. Masculinity is often misunderstood in today's world. Many people confuse it with bravado, domination, or external strength, how a man looks, how deep his voice is, or how loud he can be. But real masculinity is something deeper, quieter, and far more powerful. At the core of it lies a man's willingness and ability to take responsibility, not just for himself, but for the people who depend on him, the decisions he makes, and the energy he brings into every space he enters. It's about what a man carries and how he carries it. When a man understands that masculinity is defined by responsibility, not image, he begins to live differently. He's not driven by the need to prove anything to anyone. He's not in competition with other men for approval or validation. Instead, he's guided by a personal code. He knows who he is, and he knows what he stands for. This doesn't mean he has all the answers or that life is always easy for him, but it does mean that when things go wrong, he doesn't run. He doesn't blame others. He steps up, looks the situation in the eye, and takes accountability. That is the true essence of masculine strength. A man can have a six-pack and still be emotionally weak. He can drive an expensive car and still abandon his family. He can speak with charm and still break every promise he makes. But a responsible man, a man grounded in true masculinity, will be there when it counts. He'll show up when it's hard, not just when it's convenient. He'll take care of his commitments, even when nobody is watching. And he'll make sacrifices that others aren't willing to make, not for applause, but because it's the right thing to do. Think about a father who works long hours, not for his ego, but to feed his children. Think about a husband who stays faithful and loving, not because it's always easy, but because he made a vow and he honors it. Think about a brother who puts aside his personal wants to help his family when they're struggling. None of these actions are flashy. They're not the kind of things that get headlines or likes on social media, but they're the foundation of a life that's built on purpose. That is what masculinity, rooted in responsibility, looks like. The moment a man stops trying to look strong and starts trying to be strong, everything changes. That's when you stop hiding from your mistakes. That's when you start telling the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. That's when you apologize when you're wrong, not because you're weak, but because you're strong enough to own it. That's when your word becomes something people can depend on. Stop talking about what you're going to do and start showing people through action. A real man's life speaks louder than his mouth ever could. Responsibility also means emotional discipline. A man who is constantly led by his emotions, his anger, his ego, his fear, is dangerous to himself and others. But a responsible man learns to regulate those emotions. He feels them, but he doesn't act out of them. He knows that being masculine isn't about dominating others. It's about protecting others, even from his own darker instincts. If someone he loves pushes his buttons, he doesn't explode. He takes a breath. He thinks about the impact of his words and actions. That's not weakness. That's restraint. And it's one of the most powerful traits a man can develop. There is also a responsibility a man has to himself. A man who is truly masculine doesn't just provide for others, he also takes care of himself. He grows mentally, spiritually, and emotionally. He doesn't neglect his health. He keeps learning. He reflects on his past, not to drown in regret, but to rise in wisdom. He doesn't expect the world to fix him. He does the work to fix himself. He knows that before he can lead others, he has to first lead himself. That's responsibility. That's maturity. That's real masculinity. When masculinity is rooted in image, everything becomes about performance. The clothes you wear, the money you flash, the way you posture. But when masculinity is rooted in responsibility, it becomes about substance. It becomes about who you are when no one is watching. It becomes about whether the people in your life feel safe with you, whether they trust you, whether they're better because you're in their life. A real man doesn't leave people worse than he found them. He lifts them up. Masculinity isn't just personal, it's generational. The way a man carries his responsibility impacts his children and his children's children. A son watches how his father treats his mother. A daughter sees what kind of man she should expect based on how her father behaves. And so, a man's responsibility goes beyond his own lifetime. It's a legacy. That's why it's so important. It's not just about what you do today. It's about the pattern you're setting for tomorrow. So many of the problems we see in the world today, broken homes, lost sons, wounded daughters, can be traced back to a failure in masculine responsibility. When men walk away instead of showing up, when they avoid responsibility instead of embracing it, everyone suffers. But when men rise, when they take ownership of their roles and act with honor, the whole world gets better. Families heal, communities thrive, children grow up whole. That's the power of responsible masculinity. At the end of the day, no man is perfect. We all fall short sometimes. We all stumble. But the question isn't whether you make mistakes. It's whether you take responsibility when you do. Do you apologize? Do you make it right? Do you learn and grow so you don't repeat it? That's what separates a boy from a man. That's what defines masculinity. Not your strength, not your voice, not your wallet, but your character. And if you're a man listening to this and you feel like you've messed up too much, like it's too late, let me tell you, it's not. As long as you're breathing, you've got the chance to turn it around. Step into your responsibility. Own your story. Don't run from it. Use it. Build something better. Be the man you were born to be, not the one the world told you to pretend to be. Because in the end, when the lights go out and the show is over, people won't remember your image. They'll remember your presence, your consistency, your love, your strength, your responsibility. That's what real masculinity looks like. And it starts the moment you decide to carry what's yours with pride, courage, and honor. When a man reaches a point in his life where he no longer leans on excuses, something profound shifts inside of him. He no longer looks outward for someone to blame. He looks inward for how to improve. That's the core of competence, action over excuses. And when a man starts living like that, not only does his life change, but the people around him start to notice. Excuses are a form of escape. They're a shield used to avoid effort, growth, or discomfort. But action, real deliberate action, is what builds a life worth living. It's what builds trust, reputation, and legacy. Excuses are easy. Anybody can make them. Life is hard. No one's denying that. Things happen that are out of your control. People betray you. Doors close. Opportunities vanish. But what separates the competent from the complacent is how they respond when life knocks them down. A man of excuses spends time talking about why it happened. A man of action gets up and figures out what he can do about it. He doesn't waste time defending failure. He studies it. He doesn't get stuck in why me. He moves to what now. You see, action doesn't mean you always have the answer. It doesn't mean you'll never fail again. But it does mean that you keep going. You keep learning. You keep pushing. You take initiative. You ask for help when you need it. And you apply what you've learned. That's how a man grows. That's how you build competence. You don't become competent by sitting still. You become competent by doing, failing, adjusting, and doing again. You can read all the books, listen to all the advice, but until you take that step, until you take that risk, you won't move forward. Competent men aren't perfect men. They just refuse to sit in the same mess twice. They learn their lesson. They apply the wisdom. They stop pointing fingers and start pulling themselves up. And here's what's real. When you stop making excuses, people trust you more. They respect you because they know you're not going to fold under pressure or run from responsibility. You become dependable. And in a world full of flakiness and blame, that kind of man stands out. He doesn't need to be loud. His consistency does the talking. When you stop making excuses, you stop letting your past define your future. Everybody has a story. Everybody's been through something, but not everybody uses that pain to build strength. Most people stay stuck in their story. Competent men build from it. They don't let wounds become their identity. They let those wounds turn into wisdom. That's what action over excuses does. It transforms suffering into purpose. It turns regrets into momentum. That's how healing really happens, through responsibility. Taking action also means taking control. You may not control everything, but you do control how you show up. You control your habits, your attitude, your effort. Excuses rob you of that control. They make you believe you're powerless, but you're not. You can always do something, even if it's small, even if it's slow, even if it's quiet. The act of choosing action over excuses, even once, builds the muscle you need to do it again. That's how discipline is formed. That's how character is shaped. Now let's talk about another truth that's tightly woven with competence: stability. Competent masculinity isn't wild. It isn't unpredictable. It's stable. It's grounded. It's rooted in self-control and clarity. Leadership begins with stability because people can't follow someone who doesn't know where he's going. If a man is always reacting, always changing moods, always chasing the next thrill, no one can trust his direction. His energy becomes chaotic, and chaos can never build anything lasting. When a man is stable, he becomes a foundation. People can lean on him, not because he's controlling, but because he's calm. He doesn't panic in a crisis. He doesn't fold under stress. He takes a breath, gathers himself, and chooses his response wisely. That's power. That's strength. That's masculinity, refined by wisdom. Stability doesn't mean he's emotionless. It means his emotions don't rule him. He feels them, but he doesn't become them. He leads himself first, and because of that, others feel safe following his lead. Stability also brings peace, and peace is powerful. We often underestimate the impact of a peaceful presence, especially in men. But when a man brings peace into his home, into his relationship, into his conversations, people are drawn to him. Children feel safe, women feel protected, friends feel supported, and it's not because he controls everything. It's because he's solid. He's not up one day and down the next. He's not quick to anger or slow to forgive. He knows who he is, and he stays rooted in it. This kind of man isn't flashy. He doesn't need to be. His strength speaks for itself. His confidence is quiet, not because he's unsure, but because he has nothing to prove. And that's rare. That's the kind of man who inspires others, not by demanding loyalty, but by earning it. Stability doesn't just build trust, it builds legacy, because people remember how you made them feel. And if your presence brought steadiness in a world full of noise, they'll never forget it. To be stable, a man has to be intentional. He has to set boundaries. He has to know his values. He can't go wherever the wind blows. He makes decisions not just based on how he feels today, but on the man he wants to be 5 years from now. He thinks long term. He doesn't chase every impulse. He understands that consistency is more important than intensity. One solid step every day will outlast 100 half-hearted ones. That's how real leadership works. That's how real life is built. When a man chooses action over excuses and leads with stability, he becomes unshakable. He may bend, but he won't break. He may struggle, but he doesn't quit. He builds a life that others want to be part of, not because he's perfect, but because he's present, reliable, and real. In today's world, where so many people are distracted, impulsive, and reactive, that kind of masculinity is not just rare, it's necessary. So every man has a choice to make. You can keep explaining why you're stuck, or you can start moving. You can keep letting your emotions dictate your direction, or you can ground yourself in truth and purpose. That choice, repeated day after day, is what will determine the kind of man you become. You don't need to be a superhero. You just need to show up every day, on purpose, with integrity. That's how you build competence. That's how you build trust. That's how you walk in the kind of masculinity that doesn't crumble when tested, but grows stronger with every challenge. There's a quiet kind of power that comes with emotional discipline, and that's what real men carry with them. In a world where people often act out their feelings without thinking about the damage they cause, a man who chooses restraint stands out like a lighthouse in a storm. Leadership doesn't come from being the loudest or the most aggressive. It comes from being the most stable, the most reliable, and the most composed. When things get tough, a competent man knows how to feel everything, but he doesn't let those emotions run the show. He's not cold or detached, but he's not ruled by mood swings or impulses either. He understands the importance of controlling what comes out of his mouth, how he moves, and what kind of energy he brings into the room. A man with emotional discipline thinks before he reacts. He pauses when he's angry. He breathes when he's frustrated. He knows that every word carries weight, especially when spoken in moments of tension. That kind of self-mastery isn't easy. It takes work, but that's the point. Competence means doing what's hard because it's right. There's nothing weak about a man who keeps his cool. That's not passiveness. That's power under control. That's the kind of masculinity that protects rather than wounds, that builds rather than breaks. This level of emotional discipline starts with self-awareness. A man has to know his triggers. He has to know what frustrates him, what wounds him, what drives him. If he doesn't know himself, he'll be a slave to his reactions. But when he's honest with himself about his past, his pain, his patterns, he gains the ability to choose differently. He doesn't use his past as an excuse to hurt others. He uses it as a reason to be better. When you see a man who can stand in conflict and not explode, who can feel hurt and still respond with clarity, you're looking at someone who has done inner work. That's the kind of competence that can't be faked. And this discipline doesn't just help the man, it blesses everyone around him. When a man can control himself, he becomes safe to be around. People trust him. His children feel secure with him. His partner knows that even when things are tense, she won't be disrespected or dismissed. His friends know he's not going to snap the moment something goes wrong. Emotional discipline becomes a form of leadership because people follow consistency, not chaos. That's the kind of man who can build a family, a business, a legacy, because he's not going to let a temporary emotion destroy something permanent. But discipline doesn't mean suppression. It doesn't mean pretending everything is okay. when it's not. A competent man allows himself to feel, but he processes those feelings in healthy ways. He talks when it's time to talk. He rests when it's time to rest. He gets help when it's time to heal. That's maturity. That's courage. That's real masculinity. Not a hard shell, but a strong center. It's not about never crying. It's about knowing when to cry and when to stand up. It's not about never feeling anger. It's about knowing how to channel it into something constructive. Because when a man masters his emotions, he becomes unshakable. The next thing a competent man understands is that he doesn't need validation to lead. He doesn't need to announce his presence or dominate a room to be masculine. His life speaks for itself. A man who truly understands his value leads by example, not by force. He doesn't chase followers. He builds trust. He doesn't talk about how powerful he is. He shows it in how he carries himself, how he treats others, and how consistent he is in his actions. Leadership isn't about being first. It's about serving others in a way that lifts them up, even as you rise. And the most respected leaders are the ones who never had to declare their position. They earned it. A man who leads with competence understands that leadership is not about control. It's about influence. He knows that barking orders or using fear doesn't make him strong. What makes him strong is when people choose to follow him because they respect who he is. That respect comes from integrity, from being dependable, from doing what he said he would do, long after the feeling he said it in has passed. He's not swayed by popularity. He's guided by principles. And when he does make mistakes, as every man does, he owns them. He apologizes. He makes things right. That's what leadership rooted in competence looks like. You won't find this kind of man wasting time trying to outshine others. He's too focused on his own growth. He's not driven by ego. He's driven by purpose. And because he's not trying to compete, he's quick to celebrate others. He knows that another man's light doesn't dim his own. In fact, he uses his strength to lift others higher. That's the mark of a true leader. When you've got competence, you don't need a spotlight. Your presence is your proof. Now, one of the most powerful truths a competent man lives by is that his masculinity is not about him. It's about the people around him. Masculinity at its highest level serves others. It protects, uplifts, nurtures, and strengthens. A man's presence should bring comfort to those he loves. When he walks into a room, people should feel more secure, not more anxious. That's the kind of impact a man has when his masculinity is anchored in service, not ego. This means a competent man takes responsibility, not just for what he does, but for how others experience him. He doesn't use his strength to dominate or intimidate. He uses it to make others feel safe and seen. He shows up for his family, not because he has to, but because he wants to. He sacrifices not because he's forced to, but because he understands that love requires effort. His masculinity is expressed in how he listens, how he protects, how he gives without keeping score. And because he serves with strength, people around him thrive. His woman feels supported. His children feel valued. His friends feel empowered. This kind of man isn't afraid to be soft where it matters. He can play on the floor with his kids and still stand like a giant. When trouble comes knocking, he can say, "I love you," and "I'm sorry," in the same breath. He doesn't fear vulnerability because he knows it doesn't make him weak. It makes him whole. He understands that real strength is having nothing to prove and still giving everything you've got. So when you put all this together, a man who disciplines his emotions, who leads by example, and who serves others through his masculinity, you get a force that transforms everything he touches. He doesn't just live, he builds. He doesn't just speak, he inspires. He doesn't just exist, he uplifts. That's competence and masculinity. It's not about being better than others. It's about being better for others. It's not about noise. It's about presence. Not about being feared, but being trusted. And the beautiful thing is, this kind of man is not born. He's made through choices, through practice, through commitment, through showing up every single day, and choosing growth over comfort, purpose over pride, action over ego. That's what turns a man into someone who doesn't just carry the title of man, but wears it with honor, dignity, and strength. When a man begins to understand that his life affects more than just himself, something shifts in how he carries his masculinity. Competence in masculinity isn't just about how a man lives. It's about how others live because of him. It's about how his presence influences his family, his partner, his children, his friends, and even people who only know him in passing. A man who is competent doesn't operate only from self-interest.
He understands that his words and actions ripple outward, shaping the environment he's in. When a man is grounded, clear, and responsible, the people around him feel the benefit. They stand taller, they feel safer, they have more space to grow, because he's not taking energy from them. He's bringing strength and stability into the space. A competent man knows he has power, not the kind that demands submission, but the kind that makes others feel secure. That power is in how he listens, how he handles conflict, how he carries burdens without complaint, and how he shows up when others would disappear. He's the man who answers the phone when his friend calls in crisis. He's the one who doesn't leave his kids waiting at the door. He's the one whose woman knows she doesn't have to carry everything alone. It's not about being perfect. It's about being present, being consistent, being dependable, and that kind of consistency becomes the foundation others build on. Incompetence creates instability. When a man refuses to be responsible, when he reacts instead of leads, when he breaks promises and disappears in times of need, people suffer, children grow up insecure, partners feel anxious, teams fall apart. But when a man steps into his full responsibility and embraces mature masculinity, it becomes a kind of healing. It becomes a source of strength, not just for himself, but for everyone in his orbit. He's like a solid tree with deep roots. Others can lean on him and know they won't fall. And when life's storms hit, he may bend, but he doesn't break. His stability gives others the courage to face their own battles. There's a quiet kind of leadership in that. You don't need a title to lead. A man's competence is his influence. People take note of how he moves. They see that he doesn't talk behind people's backs. He doesn't lie to get ahead. He doesn't disappear when the situation gets tough. Instead, he owns his flaws, corrects his course, and grows right in front of you. That authenticity becomes magnetic. People naturally follow a man who leads with integrity, who keeps his word, who doesn't act one way in public and another in private. The people around him feel safe because they know what to expect. He's solid through and through. And this kind of masculine competence, it doesn't just stay with you, it extends into the next generation. Sons watch how their fathers speak to their mothers. Daughters observe how their fathers carry themselves. And even if a man doesn't have children of his own, there's always someone watching, whether it's a nephew, a neighbor, a younger man at work. The way you handle your life becomes a silent education for others. That's how legacy is formed, not by wealth, not by trophies, but by how many lives you quietly touched and made better, just by being steady, honest and real. A competent man understands that life isn't about showing off, it's about showing up. Anyone can talk big, but when the pressure hits, when it's time to be counted on, when it's time to step up and do what needs to be done, that's when the truth shows. You either build people up or break them down. You either leave people stronger or more wounded. Competence and masculinity means you're a man others are glad to know, not because you give them gifts or compliments, but because your life makes theirs better. This doesn't mean you never make mistakes. Every man falls short. Every man has moments he's not proud of. But a competent man doesn't hide from that. He faces it. He apologizes. He makes it right. He doesn't let pride get in the way of healing. And by doing so, he teaches others that accountability is not weakness, it's strength. A man who takes ownership of his life teaches those around him to do the same. And that's what creates real change, real healing, and real generational progress. You don't have to be famous to matter. You don't have to be wealthy to be powerful. If you want to know the measure of a man, don't look at what he owns. Look at who he is. To the people around him, are they thriving because of his presence? Do they feel more confident, more safe, more seen when he's around? Are they inspired by how he lives, how he treats others, and how he handles adversity? That's competence. That's masculinity doing its job. The world doesn't need more men chasing attention. It needs more men paying attention to their impact, their integrity, their relationships, their responsibilities. That's where strength lives, in the everyday choices, in the quiet sacrifices, in the small but powerful ways you protect the peace of those you love, in the decision to be present when it would be easier to disappear, in the way you speak, the way you listen, the way you respond when someone is vulnerable with you. That's how masculinity becomes a gift instead of a threat. When you're that kind of man, you don't have to force people to respect you. They'll give it to you willingly, not because they fear you, but because they see you, because they know you're not pretending. You're not putting on a mask. You're living the truth every day. And it shows. You're the kind of man who doesn't just hold things together. When they fall, you make them stronger than they were before. And that is what masculinity, at its best, is meant to do.